She was supposed to marry a hero, but she fell in love with a man everyone wanted to hang. But first, sign up using the button below and comment on which city you are listening to this story from. The spring of 1889 had been unusually cruel in the Arizona Territory. The sun scorched the land as if to cauterize the wounds left by lawlessness. And in the town of Red Rock, they were preparing for a wedding that would supposedly wash away the sins of the past. Estella Marlowe, daughter of a local cattle magnate, was set to marry Captain Aaron Blackstone, a decorated officer of the Union Army turned local sheriff. Banners fluttered, bells rang, and the townsfolk rejoiced. After all, Blackstone had brought peace to Red Rock, had chased out the last of the outlaws, and wore his medals like badges of divine favor. Estella, in her ivory dress, smiled for the townspeople, but her heart beat strange, as if something deep inside her refused to celebrate. The stagecoach was supposed to be a simple trip. Estella had insisted on taking one last ride through the hills to see her late mother's grave before the wedding. Captain Blackstone couldn't join her too many duties, he'd said, so she went with 2 guards and a driver. But halfway through Dead Man's Pass, they were ambushed. Gunshots rang out like thunderclaps across the canyon. One guard fell before he could draw, and the driver was shot through the throat. Panic swelled. The last thing Estella saw was a shadow on horseback before the world went dark. She awoke in a small cabin built from cracked pine logs, hidden in the hills. Her wrists were untied, her dress torn. A fire burned in the hearth. Sitting across from her was a man with raven black hair, dust on his boots, and eyes like smoldering coal. He looked like danger incarnate. And yet, he didn't touch her. He'd even treated a scrape on her shoulder. "Name's Diego Cross," he said without looking at her. She knew that name. Everyone did. Wanted posters with his face hung in every saloon from Texas to California. "You killed my guards," she whispered. "No," he replied. "They were killed trying to protect a lie." She wanted to scream. Instead, she listened. Over the next 2 days, Estella learned truths that cracked her world open like a dry riverbed. Diego claimed he once fought for the Union too, but was betrayed, framed for a massacre he tried to stop. The real architect? Captain Blackstone. He butchered innocence and blamed me, and now he's got his eyes set on your father's land and name. You're not marrying a hero, Estella. You're marrying the devil in dress blues. She refused to believe it until Diego showed her the ledger. Real names, hidden bribes, a signature she recognized as her father's, bought and paid for. Her chest burned with disbelief. But the fire in Diego's voice was not the fire of a liar. As they made their way back toward Red Rock, Diego planning to turn himself in to reveal the truth, Estella rode beside him in silence. Her veil now served as a bandage on his bleeding arm. She thought of Blackstone's medals, the way he always turned his eyes when asked about the war, the time he had shot a boy for stealing apples. There had always been cracks in the story. She just hadn't wanted to look closely. "You still believe in justice?" she asked Diego. He nodded, but not the kind handed down by gallows and gold. That night, as coyotes howled in the distance, she wondered who she truly loved. The man with polished boots and a perfect smile, or the outlaw who had saved her life without asking for anything in return. Sometimes the stories told in church pews and saloons are just illusions carved by those in power. Estella had been set to marry a savior, but now she wasn't sure who needed saving more, herself or the man riding beside her, hunted for crimes he didn't commit.
Ashes of the hero. Some men wear badges, others wear masks. but the devil wears both. Red Rock simmered in anticipation. The wedding of the year had become the talk of 3 territories, but the bride hadn't returned. Captain Aaron Blackstone kept his composure before the townsfolk, assuring them that Estella had merely extended her visit to her mother's grave. But behind closed doors, his fury cracked through the facade. He knew the signs, the timing, the location. Only one man would dare interfere like this: Diego Cross, a name that still haunted his military reports and nightmares alike. Aaron ordered his men to search every ridge and ravine. "Bring her back," he growled, "and bring him back in chains." Meanwhile, Estella and Diego camped in the ruins of an old telegraph station burnt down years ago in a railway dispute. The smoke-blackened beams whispered of greed, silence, and lost lives, an echo of what Diego claimed Aaron had done. As she sat across from the wanted man, eating beans from a battered tin, she asked the question she had feared all along. "Did you ever kill innocent people?" Diego looked at her, his eyes unflinching. "Yes, in war. We all did. But ever for profit, never for silence." It wasn't a confession, it was a lament. Tension thickened with every mile toward Red Rock. Estella's mind wrestled with questions that stabbed like spurs. Could she trust the word of a murderer over the man who once kissed her hand before battle? But deep inside, the truth had already begun to bloom like a desert flower. Blackstone had never protected her. He had possessed her. And Diego had bled for her without chains to bind him. At dusk, they came across a group of marshals on the trail. Diego raised his hands, ready to surrender, but Estella stepped forward. "This man saved my life. He's innocent of the ambush." The marshals hesitated, but recognition gleamed in their eyes, and one reached for his rifle. A single shot cracked the silence. Diego didn't fire. Estella did. The bullet struck the ground at the marshal's feet. Her hands shook, but her voice was steel. "Take one more step, and I'll shoot again." The men stood frozen. One of them, older, with gray whiskers and a badge half-polished, lowered his rifle. "Miss Marlowe, you know aiding a fugitive is a crime?" Estella lifted her chin. "So is burying the truth. And my father's ledger has the names of every man Blackstone bought." The old marshal exchanged a glance with the others. Then he nodded. 5 miles west. There's an old mining trail. You'll be less likely to get caught." They rode off. No shots were fired. By the time they reached the edge of Red Rock, dusk bled across the sky like a wounded animal. They stopped near a cliff overlooking the town. Church bells rang in the distance rehearsal for the wedding, now just 2 days away. Estella stared at the steeple. Her past, her illusions. "What if they won't believe us?" she asked. Diego answered quietly, "Then I'll hang. But at least you'll know the truth." The weight of truth is heavier than a coffin. In just days, Estella had been forced to bury the future she thought she wanted and face a world far more tangled than tales of heroes and villains. No badge could make a man just. No wedding could make a woman blind. In that moment, with the wind in her veil and a pistol at her hip, Estella Marlowe stopped being a bride and became something else, entirely a reckoner. Estella and Diego rode into Red Rock at sunrise. She carried the ledger like a weapon. He carried nothing but his name. The square was full of people. Captain Blackstone stood at the gallows with a noose already swinging. "You dare come here with him?" he shouted. Estella didn't blink. "You buried a village and blamed a man who tried to stop it. I'm done protecting your secret." Sheriff Beckett, Blackstone's longtime friend, demanded to see the evidence. Diego spoke, calm, steady, telling everything. The crowd listened. The ledger didn't lie, but Blackstone did. He drew his pistol. Estella moved, but Beckett was faster. The sheriff shot Blackstone through the chest. The crowd gasped as the hero of Red Rock fell, medals clattering to the dirt. The trial was swift. Diego was cleared. Beckett backed them. The gallows were torn down that same day. Estella stood beside Diego, not as a witness, but as a woman who had chosen truth over comfort. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's a whisper that survives the noise. Train to redemption. She wasn't running anymore. She was choosing. They left Red Rock with nothing but a plan. Take the eastbound train, start over. Elijah Blackstone. Aaron's brother wanted blood. He found them, led a small gang to stop them from boarding. They fought back. A gunfight erupted on the platform. Diego was stabbed. Estella shot her way through. They reached the train, but Diego stayed behind to cover her escape, until, at the last second, his hand caught the edge of the train. She pulled him in, alive. The bride and the bullet. She lost everything she thought she wanted, to find the one thing she truly needed. Midway through the ride, Union soldiers stopped the train. They weren't bounty hunters, they were there for Diego. Diego Cortez, they said. Not Cross, his real name, his real ast. He had been a military spy, infiltrating Aaron Blackstone's corruption before the war ended. Betrayed by his own commanders, left to hang. Estella was shocked. He had hidden even this from her. But then she opened a letter addressed to her from Washington. Diego was pardoned, cleared, reinstated. Her letter had reached the president. He was free, officially. 6 months later, they married in a dusty field north of Santa Fe. No veil, no church. Just two people who had walked through fire, found truth, and chose love.